A massive camp is struck in the deep desert. Tent pegs are pulled from cracked, baked earth. Hundreds of thousands of feet march forward. A curse is spoken in the open air. Wild bears emerge from the timber. The number of bodies left on the dirt road is exact. Srad. 42. 14 generations. Captives sit weeping by foreign rivers, hanging their stringed instruments on the willow trees. Exiles return to rebuild a fractured altar with blistered hands. Alexander the Great marches his phalanxes across the map. The Roman legions arrive. They drive their iron spikes into the Judean soil. The prophets stop speaking. The heavens go completely silent. 14 generations. Every name is a pulled tent peg. Every generation is a dry riverbed in the desert. The first wilderness was made of red rock and scorching wind, measured in 42 physical stops. This second wilderness is made of war and silence, measured in 42 human lifespans. Moses recorded the geography of the wandering. Matthew records the biology of the wandering. You can hear the rhythm of the survival. Fathers pass the covenant to sons who immediately forget it. Mothers hide their children from invading armies. Kings are assassinated in their beds. Prophets are thrown into dark, muddy cisterns. The bloodline is constantly under threat of total extinction. It narrows down to a single fragile thread, nearly snapping a dozen times. These names are not a list of perfect saints. They are a ledger of survivors. God forces the Messiah's lineage through the exact same mathematical pattern as the wandering in the Sinai. 42 stages before entering the Promised Land. Decades after the resurrection, an old man sits on the rocky penal colony of Patmos, breathing in the smell of salt and sulfur. 42 generations before the King of Heaven takes a breath of earthly air in a stone manger. The ancient architecture holds firm. The waiting is not a failure of God's timing. It is the boundary He draws around the dark. He numbers the days of the exile. He counts the exact generation when the silence will finally break. The 42 generations prove that the chaos is actually a carefully measured countdown. But that countdown can feel entirely different depending on where you are, standing in history. Matthew uses the number to measure the long, agonizing wait for rescue. But soon, this exact same mathematical blueprint is going to violently shift from an ancient genealogy into a universal human experience. You are likely not walking across a physical desert of red sand, and your genealogy is probably not being recorded on a sacred scroll for the rest of human history. But you are intimately familiar with the machinery of the waiting room. You know the physical weight of a prayer that seems to hit the ceiling and bounce directly back onto the floor. You know the metallic taste of anxiety in the back of your throat when you look at a bank account or a medical chart. He writes down a terrifying vision of the end of the human age. A beast rises from the sea. The holy city is trampled under the boots, and realize absolutely nothing has changed. You wake up in the dark, staring at the faint shadows cast across the ceiling, listening to the heavy, rhythmic silence of a God who feels completely absent from your crisis. We are a species terrified of the undefined middle. Think about how human psychology operates when placed under extreme stress. If a doctor tells you that a brutal treatment will last for exactly 42 days, you will buy a calendar. You will cross off each daily box with the thick ink of a heavy black pen. You will endure the physical agony because your brain can attach the suffering to a specific expiration date. But if that exact same doctor says, the pain is indefinite, that it might last a week, or it might last a lifetime, your spirit breaks on the first afternoon. The physical pain is identical, but the absence of a boundary turns the suffering into pure despair. When you are caught in a season of transition, when the old tent pegs have been violently pulled from the ground, but the new land has not yet materialized, the most paralyzing fear is that the wandering will literally never stop. You assume that because you cannot see the edge of the desert, there is no edge. But the architecture of 42 forces a completely different reality. The silence you are experiencing is not an endless void. It is a measured distance of a chaotic empire. The time allotted for this global nightmare is given in months. Exactly 42. 42 stops in the dust. 42 generations of silence. God does not abandon his people to infinite wilderness. He numbers the stops of your exhaustion just as meticulously as he numbered the encampments in the Sinai. Every bitter well you are forced to drink from. Every season of absolute obscurity. Every time you have to pack up in a broken dream and move forward into the unknown. These are not random accidents of a chaotic, uncaring universe. They are a massa. They are the exact stages required to build a resilience that cannot be shattered when you finally arrive at the promise. You can survive the desert if you know the stops are counted. You can endure the waiting if you know the generations are numbered. But what happens when the wilderness is not just a quiet season of waiting, but a season of active, terrifying assault? What happens when the evil in the world is unleashed in physical form, and the very city of God is trampled under boots? The sky over the Aegean Sea turns pitch black. The salt air grows thick with the smell of sulfur. An old man stands on the jagged, wet rocks of a Roman penal colony. He watches the dark water violently tear open. A beast rises from the foaming sea. 10 horns pierce the low, churning clouds. 7 heads break the violent surface of the water. 42 dead in the road. 42 months of tribulation. Most people assume this is just random ancient math, a coincidence of the text. And it is incredibly blasphemous. Names are carved deeply into its flesh. It steps onto the gray sand. It opens a terrifying mouth like a lion. It speaks arrogant, echoing words against the throne of heaven. The vision violently shifts. The holy city of Jerusalem appears, but it is not a sanctuary of peace. It is an active, bleeding war zone. Foreign armies breach the thick stone walls. Heavy iron boots crush the sacred inner courts. The temple marble shatters under their relentless weight. The ancient altars are completely desecrated. The blood of martyrs soaks into the dry dust. 2 prophets stand in the ruined streets. They wear rough, scratchy sackcloth. They breathe literal fire from their mouths. They shut the sky so no rain falls. They turn the fresh rivers into dark blood. The beast makes war against them. It strikes them down with brutal force. Their lifeless bodies lie in the open street. The entire world celebrates their assassination. People exchange gifts over their unburied corpses. The chaos feels absolute. The destruction seems infinite. It looks as though evil has completely swallowed the earth. But a voice speaks over the roar of the vision. A strict, mathematical measurement is handed down from heaven. The Gentiles will trample the holy city. The 2 witnesses will prophesy in the ruins. Easy to read, right past these numbers. Rushing to get to the narrative, to the miracles, to the parts that feel immediately applicable to our modern lives. The beast will wage a terrifying war on the saints. And the exact duration of this global nightmare is explicitly declared. 42 months. The 42 months are not a measure of the beast's unbridled supremacy. They are the exact length of its chain. The number holds its ancient, rigid shape. 42 stops in a scorching red desert. 42 generations in a broken, fragile bloodline. Now, 42 months of intense, global tribulation. The architectural blueprint returns for the final act of human history. God does not abandon the earth to an infinite apocalypse. He places a hard, immovable boundary around the darkest season the world will ever see. The beast roars in the deafening wind. The empires of men conquer and devour. The remaining saints are pushed to the absolute brink of starvation and death. The thick smoke of a burning world rises to obscure the sun. But the beast cannot take another day. It cannot stretch the months to 43. When the clock hits the final second of the 42nd month, the permission is violently revoked. The terror is loud. The enemy appears totally, physically invincible on the sand. The destruction looks completely out of control, but there is a detail hiding in plain sight that changes the entire power dynamic of this nightmare. But if you look closer at the map of the desert, at the family tree of Jesus, at the terrifying stopwatch of the apocalypse, it is found in the specific Greek word John writes down to describe how this monster gets its authority in the first place. Revelation chapter 13. Verse 5. The beast is standing on the sand, roaring its blasphemies into the dark wind. The destruction feels entirely out of control, and the saints are being crushed under its weight. And John, pressing his reed pen into rough parchment, writes down this sentence. And the beast was given a mouth, uttering haughty and blasphemous words, and it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. The word your English Bible translates as authority here is the Greek exousia. It appears over 100 times in the New Testament, but its meaning is highly specific. It does not mean raw, inherent physical strength. The New Testament uses a different Greek word, dunamis, for that kind of power. Exousia means permission. It means delegated jurisdiction. It is the legal right to act within a strictly defined boundary, handed down by a vastly superior power. It is the exact same word Jesus uses in John chapter 19. He is standing on the cold marble floor of the Roman Praetorium. His back is bleeding from the scourge. He is wrapped in a mock purple robe. Pilate looks at the prisoner and says, "You start to see a blueprint hiding in plain sight." 42 is not a coincidence. It is the length of the wilderness. Do you not know that I have authority to release you and authority to crucify you? And Jesus looks back at the governor of Rome and says, "You would have no exousia over me at all unless it had been given you from above." That word changes everything about the apocalypse. When John records that the beast was given exousia for exactly 42 months, he is completely shifting the power dynamic of the vision. The terrifying monster clawing its way out of the boiling. Aegean Sea is not a sovereign king. The chaos is not an independent force. It is a strictly monitored permission slip, even at the very end of human history, when all hell literally breaks loose on the earth. The darkness does not get to write its own schedule. God hands the enemy a stopwatch with exactly 42 months on it. He allows the beast to pull the tent pegs up. He allows the world to enter its final wilderness. But the leash is securely fastened. And when the final grain of sand drops in the hourglass, the exousia is permanently revoked. From the scorching red dirt of the Sinai Peninsula to the fragile bloodline of the Messiah, all the way to the apocalyptic shores of Patmos. The ancient architecture holds firm. The number binds the waiting. It is the exact measurement of the space between the promise given and the promise fulfilled. It is the architecture of waiting. It forces the chaotic periods of history to submit to a sovereign boundary. But to truly feel the weight of what this means for the life you are living right now, you have to step back and look at the entire thread at once. A nation struck its heavy canvas tents in the scorching sand 42 times, and a new generation finally crossed the rushing river. A violent mob blocked a prophet on a dusty forest road, and 42 bodies proved the wilderness will not be mocked. A fragile bloodline survived 14 generations of war and idolatry, and the kingdom of David was established. A fractured nation marched 14 generations into the Babylonian night, and the length of their exile was exactly measured. A captive people waited 14 generations in absolute silence, and the King of the universe finally opened his eyes in a cold stone manger. A sacred city was trampled under heavy iron boots for 42 months, and the heavens strictly monitored the abuse. A beast rose from the boiling sea to roar for exactly 42 months, and the final expiration date of evil arrived. Same blueprint. Same God. But here's the part I keep coming back to. The tent pegs. The sheer physical exhaustion of the massa. When God places his people into a season of wandering, when he initiates a long, dark stretch of history where it feels like heaven, the brutal reality of having to pull an iron stake out of the hard, sun-baked dirt over and over again, never knowing when the cloud was going to settle for good. It is one thing to read about the 42 stops in a comfortable room. It is entirely another to be the one forced to pack up a fragile life, walk back out into the stinging wind, and trust that the terrifying space between is actually being mapped. If you are in a season where the waiting feels endless, where it feels like you are just pulling up tent pegs and wandering from one dry riverbed to another, you need to remember the architecture of this number. God has numbered your stops. He has placed a hard, immovable boundary around the silence. Your exhaustion is not a sign that heaven has lost your coordinates. The chaotic periods of your life are not operating on an infinite permission slip. The wilderness is not endless. It is counted. It is monitored. And may the God who maps every bitter well and numbers every pulled tent peg walk with you through the dark of your desert and bring you out carrying a resilience you could not have forged any other way. If this opened something in you, subscribe. Leave a comment, even one word helps. Share this with someone. Into a wasteland of red rock and stinging wind. They stop. They pitch the tents again. They pack them up. The heavy wooden poles of the tabernacle is completely silent, and the enemy is winning. He puts a definitive boundary around it. He numbers the stops. He counts the months. Who is currently exhausted by the waiting? Pray for us as we keep digging into these texts. He limits the chaos. To feel the weight of this design, you have to go back to the very first time this number is explicitly structured into the text. You have to look at a chapter that most readers skip entirely because it reads like a dry, monotonous travel log. But this travel log contains a secret about how God records your exhaustion. If you open a standard Bible to the book of Numbers, specifically chapter 33, you will find a wall of text that stretches on for over 40 verses. It is an exhausting, rhythmic repetition of places that no longer exist on any modern map. They set out from Ramesses and camped at Succoth. They set out from Succoth and camped at Etham. They set out from Etham and camped at Pi-hahiroth. It reads like the accounting ledger of a very tired civilization. But right at the beginning of this chapter, in verse 2, the text tells us exactly what this list actually is. Moses is commanded to write down their starting points, stage by stage, as the cloud of the presence of God dictates their every move. The word your English Bible translates as journeys or stages here, are hoisted onto calloused shoulders. The bronze basins are covered. They walk. Moses takes a piece of parchment. He dips a reed pen into dark ink. Is the Hebrew Massa. It appears across the Old Testament to describe the movements of a nomadic people. And its etymology is deeply, physically grounded. The noun Massa comes from the root verb nasa, which literally means to pull out. Specifically, in the context of ancient desert life, it refers to the pulling out of a tent peg from the hard, sun-baked dirt. When a camp was struck, when the cooking fires were extinguished, and the heavy, woven animal hair canvas was rolled up. The final act of departure was the violent upward pull of the iron or wooden stakes that kept the fragile shelter tied to the earth. That route changes everything. When God instructs Moses to record their Massa, he is not merely asking for a cartographer's outline of the Sinai Peninsula. He is asking for a record of every single time this traumatized, ex-slave population was forced to pack up whatever frail sense of stability they had managed to scrape together. He is keeping count of every time they had to pull the pegs out of the ground and walk back into the scorching wind. Numbers 33 is not a geography lesson. It is a catalog of uprootings. And when you count the number of uprootings, the number of times the cloud lifted and the pegs were pulled, it is exactly 42. This is the first time the architectural blueprint he begins to record the geography of their survival. From the brickyards of Egypt to the edge of the Jordan River, he writes down every location of the wilderness is established in the biblical narrative. 42 stages of wandering before reaching the rushing waters of the Jordan. 42 cycles of resting and breaking, of finding bitter water and running out of water entirely, of burying the older, fearful generation in the sand and raising a new one under the dark shadow of the tabernacle. The number becomes permanently welded to the concept of the space between. It becomes the numerical equivalent of the waiting room, a long, exhausting period of testing, of purification, and of relentless movement that a human being cannot speed up, no matter how desperately they want to arrive. The 42 stops were the forge that built the nation. But that ancient blueprint did not stay buried in the sand of the Sinai. Before this number becomes a measure of generations, or a terrifying countdown to the end of the world, It shows up in the historical record as a measure of sudden consequence. It moves from the deep desert onto a steep forest road, where the authority forged in that wilderness is suddenly, violently tested. The Jordan River is crossed. The mantle is passed. Elisha, carrying the heavy cloak of his master, begins the steep, rocky climb toward Bethel. Every bitter well, every dry ravine, every place where they camped under the crushing heat of the Sinai sun. He finishes the list. Bethel is a dark place. It is the geographic center of idolatry in the northern kingdom. It is a city choking on the smoke of golden calf worship. As he walks the dusty road, a crowd emerges from the city gates. Your English Bible might call them little children or youths, but the historical context and the Hebrew phrasing imply a mob of young men, likely acolytes of the idol temples. They swarm the road. They block the ascent. They chant a devastating taunt in the dry air. Go up, you bald head. Go up, you bald head. They are not mocking his physical appearance. They are telling him to ascend into the sky like his master Elijah just did. They are telling the new prophet to leave their territory. They are rejecting the messenger. And by extension, the God who sent him. Elisha turns around. He looks at the mob in the glaring sunlight. He does not argue. He does not negotiate. He speaks a curse in the name of the Lord. The silence of the road is shattered. Two female bears come tearing out of the heavy shadows of the timber. Claws meet skin. Screams echo against the limestone cliffs. The smell of pine and dust is suddenly replaced by the metallic scent of blood. When the violence stops, the dirt road is utterly quiet again. The number is exact. 42 stops. Centuries later, a tax collector sits in a quiet room and traces the bloodline of the king of the universe. And the text gives us a very specific body count. Exactly 42. This is not a story about a thin-skinned holy man losing his temper. It is the violent enforcement of a covenant boundary. The young men of Bethel stood in the way of the man carrying the authority of the wilderness. And the number 42 comes crashing down on them. In the deep desert, the 42 was the number of stages required to burn away rebellion before entering the promise. Here, 42 is the exact number of the rebellious who are struck down before the prophet can even enter the city. The bears are not just predators. They are the mathematics of consequence. The number holds its shape. It remains the exact measurement of a wilderness period, whether that period is a 40-year march across the sand or a terrifying few minutes on a forest road, where judgment falls. The wilderness does not tolerate the mockery of the promised land. But this number is not only a measure of geography or immediate judgment. It does not only count the stops in the desert or the bodies in the dirt. It counts the very heartbeat of history. Because centuries after the road to Bethel is washed clean, a man sits down. He breaks history into 3 neat blocks. 14 names. 14 names. 14 names. From Abraham standing under a canopy of stars to a baby taking its first to write the opening lines of a new covenant. And to prove that the ultimate rescue has finally arrived, he has to count the waiting. Matthew chapter 1 opens a New Testament not with a rushing wind or a parting sea, but with a wall of names. It feels, to the modern reader, like walking through a dusty graveyard and reading the faded inscriptions on ancient headstones. Abraham begat Isaac, and Isaac begat Jacob. But when you reach verse 17, Matthew stops the relentless march of names and hands you the final calculation. He writes that from Abraham to David was 14 generations. From David to the Babylonian exile was 14 generations. And from the dark years of the exile to the birth of the Messiah was 14 generations. 14 times 3. Exactly 42. The word Matthew uses to frame this massive architectural structure is the Greek genea. It appears over 40 times in the Gospel of Matthew alone, and it is almost always translated as generation. But its etymology reaches deep into the bedrock of human existence. The noun comes from the primary verb ginomai, which means to become, to come into being, to emerge from the void into history. It is the raw machinery of biological time, fathers and mothers, passing the heavy baton of survival down to sons and daughters in a fractured world. Breath in a cold stone manger. The count is meticulously kept. The total number of generations is exact, 42. It is the exact same word Jesus weaponizes later in Matthew 24 when he looks at the looming destruction of Jerusalem and declares, "This Genea will not pass away until all these things take place." That root changes everything about how you read the opening page of the New Testament. Matthew is not just giving you a biological ledger, he is giving you a theological stopwatch. If the idea that the biblical authors hid this kind of architectural precision inside a list of names is stirring up a hunger to know the text better, you're exactly who this channel is for. Drop a thought in the comments and hit subscribe, because every week we go deeper into the original languages than you knew was possible. So Matthew builds the engine of history. He takes the absolute chaos of human failure, the kings who burned their own children in the fire, the women who had to leverage their bodies for survival, the men who 42-piece framework. This is the second great wilderness. The first was a physical desert of red sand and bitter wells that lasted 42 geographical stops. But this second wilderness is a desert of time. It is a chronological wasteland, stretching from the promise given to Abraham all the way to a cold stone manger in Bethlehem. A prophet walks up a steep, dusty road toward the idol-worshipping city of Bethel. A violent crowd comes out to mock the authority of God. Israel was wandering through the centuries, waiting for the presence of God to finally settle among them again. And, just like the geography of the Sinai, God did not let the wandering stretch on into infinity. He put a hard, immovable boundary around the bloodline. He numbered the births. He measured the exact duration of the exile and the silence. But Matthew's genealogy is only the quiet, rhythmic ticking of a clock that points toward a much louder alarm. Because the final time this number appears in the text, it is no longer counting stops in the sand or generations of waiting. It is counting the expiration date of absolute terror. An old man stands under a black sky, looking up at the stars. A boy is bound with rough rope on an altar of uncut stone. A younger brother steals a blessing in the dark. A family survives a famine. A shepherd boy is anointed with heavy, fragrant oil. 14 generations. A king watches a woman bathe from a roof. A magnificent temple is built with imported cedar and beaten gold. A kingdom violently rips in half. Foreign armies gather on the horizon. The thick stone walls of Jerusalem are shattered by battering rams. The smoke of the burning sanctuary chokes the air. Heavy iron chains drag against the dust. A broken nation marches east into the Babylonian night.